to the Unseen Podcast, a podcast dedicated to missing people, unresolved cases, and UK true crime. Today we are going to look into a story that both shocked and interested me from the moment that I heard about it. I was also extremely surprised that I had not heard about it before. In the next couple of episodes, we are going to look into the story of the GEC Marconi deaths, which is about a number of people that died in what can only be described as odd circumstances during the 1980s. The stories of these people have almost become and been seen as a conspiracy theory. However, I believe what happened to these people was very real, and their stories deserve to be told in order to get to the bottom of what happened. I just want to note that it is unclear whether any of these deaths are connected, as none of them have ever been officially linked, and all of them have had official verdicts concluded about them. However, questions still remain about the circumstances during the time that the deaths occurred. I have used the book Open Verdicts by Tony Collins as a very useful source for this episode. If you want to have a look at this book, all information will be available in the show notes. This episode contains some descriptions that some listeners may find distressing, so listener caution is advised. In the mid-1980s, a number of stories and reports would reach the ears of Tony Collins, who was a journalist for Computer Weekly magazine. The magazine had been running since 1966. It provided its readers with information about new developments in the technological world and was targeted at IT professionals and those with an interest in learning more about IT issues. The information, however, that was coming in was not specifically about technology. The information was hinting that a spate of deaths that occurred recently in different parts of the country may have had some suspicious connections. Initially, the stories appeared to be about two men in particular that appeared to work in the same industry. The original reports that came forward suggested that the deaths of the men could be connected to their careers in the defence industry, particularly for the company GEC Marconi. GEC Marconi was the defence arm of the General Electric Company and had been known for its defence products during the war and its connection with important technological developments in this area. The Marconi Company was later acquired by British Aerospace in the 1990s and was renamed BAE, which is what the company is best known as today. The magazine and other outlets had been alerted to these two deaths due to the fact that despite seemingly not being linked, they appeared to have a number of coincidences that could not be ignored. The first death that came to their attention was the death of Vimal Dajibhai, a 24-year-old computer programmer who lived with his wife in North London. On the evening of Monday the 4th of August 1986, Vimal had driven to Bristol and travelled to the Clifton Suspension Bridge. The next morning it was discovered that Vimal was located underneath the bridge, and it appeared that he had committed suicide. The Clifton Suspension Bridge is unfortunately a place where suicides are not uncommon, and police and pathologists have frequently been called out to the scene. It appeared that this is what may have happened in Vimal's case, as his car was also discovered in a car park not far from the scene at the bridge. It was discovered that Vimal had 2 bottles of wine in his car, one on the front seat and one in the back of the car. Neither bottle appeared to have been opened. Vimal's wife and family were informed about what had happened to him, and after Vimal had been identified, the family were able to take his car home. It seemed that the police were treating Vimal's death as a suicide from the beginning of the investigation, due to the circumstances in which he had been found. This, however, was not necessarily a theory that Vimal's family agreed with. Everyone that knew Vimal discussed how he was in a really good place in his life. They were not sure why Vimal would have taken his own life in such a manner and in a place where he did not know anyone or have any connections. On that Monday, the 4th of August, Vimal had gone to work as normal at Marconi Underwater Systems at Croxley Green, close to Watford. Vimal's job role involved guidance electronics for a torpedo called Stingray. He was in his final week at the Marconi Company and had got a job in the City of London that he was starting the week after. It is reported that he had received a phone call from his friend and former landlord, He wanted help with a computer language that he was unsure about. During this phone call with his friend, Vimal agreed to help him that evening after work. After leaving work that night, Vimal's movements become a little unclear, but it is certain that he did not reach his destination to meet his friend. The only other information about that night is that somehow he had made his way to Bristol and specifically to the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Vimal's death had a number of worrying elements to it, however, that bothered those reading about it and his family and friends. One of the things that was odd from the outset is that it was reported that Vimal did not drink, and therefore would not have been drinking the wine that was in the car. Another thing that seemed strange was that Vimal did not know anyone in Bristol and would have had no reason to travel there. It was later ruled that a small mark that had been noticed and originally labelled as a puncture mark on one of Vimal's buttocks was a natural occurrence from falling and was also not labelled as suspicious. Vimal's friends and family were puzzled by what had happened to him, and many just could not understand why he would have committed suicide. It appeared that he led a happy life and did not have many problems prior to his death. Of course, it is always difficult to assess someone's state of mind before something like this happens. However, it is clear that many people in Vimal's life did not believe that this was a plausible theory. The coroner ruled an open verdict in Vimal's case, which meant that they were unable to reach a verdict of what had happened to him. Another case not long after Vimal's death caught the attention of both the coroner in Bristol and the public. On the 28th of October 1986, 26-year-old Arshad Sharif, a computer programmer who also worked for Marconi, but in Middlesex, was found dead in Bristol. It appeared that he had tied together 4 lengths of rope and attached one end to a tree and the other end around his neck. He had then got into his father's car that he had used to get to the location and driven off. The strange way in which this death appeared to have taken place set off a number of alarm bells. This method of suicide was unheard of, and it was not a method that had been seen by many coroners. It seemed that from the outset of the investigation, police and media reports were suggesting that Arshad's death was a suicide. This suggestion seems to have come from the fact that a tape recording was found in Arshad's car, which was labelled, "Please hand this to my father." This tape reportedly did not, however, proclaim that he intended to commit suicide. According to Tony Collins's book Open Verdict, Arshad's father was not convinced that his son would have committed suicide, and the inconsistencies in the reporting of his son's death also bothered him. Some newspaper reports stated that the car had crashed into a wall. However, it was later confirmed that the car was relatively undamaged. Arshad's movements in the days leading up to his death were looked into closely. It appeared that he had indeed been doing some things that could have been described as unusual during this time. He had travelled to Bristol the night before his death and stayed at a guest house. The owner of the guest house reportedly said that he was acting normal and was chatting about his upcoming marriage. Arshad was due to get married to a woman from Pakistan. The date of the marriage had been pushed back due to visa problems. By all accounts, he was excited to be married and was looking forward to it. The next thing that police discovered was that Arshad had purchased just one length of tow rope at 10:45 a.m. the Monday before he died. It was believed that he had another length of tow rope in his car as well as this. It is unclear where the other 2 lengths of rope came from that were eventually used, and the police were unable to trace Arshad's other movements before his death. It was also unclear why Arshad had travelled to Bristol from his home in Walthamstow to commit suicide. He did not have many connections to the location, except the fact that British Aerospace was located not far from the guest house where Arshad had stayed. The book Open Verdict explains that Arshad had previously worked there. The strength of the connection to Bristol, however, was not very strong, and it seemed a little unusual that he would have travelled so far if suicide had been his intention. The similarities between Vimal and Arshad's deaths raised a number of questions. Why had 2 computer programmers who worked for the same company travelled to Bristol to commit suicide? The fact that both men had no strong connection to the area concerned those reading about the cases, even the coroner who dealt with the case of Arshad Sharif. The coroner, Donald Hawkins, stated that he believed Arshad's death to be a suicide and that the tape implied that he intended on committing suicide that evening. However, he did state his reservations about both Vimal and Arshad's death. One report states that he said, "This is past coincidence. I will not be completing this inquest until I know how two men with no connection to Bristol came to meet the same end here." The deaths caused alarm, and the fact that both men worked in some capacity for the defence industry would raise a number of red flags in other, earlier, unexplained cases. One of the earliest cases that has been linked with the other deaths was that of Professor Keith Bowden in 1982. Professor Bowden was a contractor working for GEC Marconi, and in 1982 he worked for Essex University. It was known that he was an expert on supercomputers and on computer-controlled aircrafts. In March 1982, Professor Bowden had been attending a social function in London and was on his way back home. On his way home, his car drove across a dual carriageway, fell down off a bridge and landed in an abandoned rail yard. Professor Bowden was killed in the incident. The circumstances of what had happened seem rather odd, but not necessarily unheard of when it comes to road accidents. Keith had been at a function that evening, and it was initially suggested that he may have had a drink while at the event, and this could have impaired his driving skills. However, it was later reported that those people at the event did not see him drinking, or do not remember seeing him drink enough that it would have impaired him. Of course, in an incident like this, it is also possible that he had simply lost concentration and had not realised how far over on the dual carriageway he was. The incident was dramatic and tragic and was not at all expected by those that knew him. He was not known to drive fast and erratically, and the speed at which he came off the road implied that he must have been driving at quite a fast speed. The official verdict that was reached was that Professor Bowden had possibly been drinking, and that his death had been an accident. People close to him, however, did not agree with this verdict, and it is known that Keith's solicitor hired an accident investigator to investigate the wreck and his car to try and determine what he believed happened. The accident investigator determined that it appeared that the tyres on the car may well have been changed before the crash, as the normally well-maintained tyres were now worn and the tread had all but disappeared. This implied that something had been changed about the tyres before the incident. However, it is of course very difficult to determine why or when this could have happened, and it is difficult to establish if this could have been done by Professor Bowden himself. Those close to Professor Bowden have maintained, however, that they do not believe that this could have been suicide, and the theory that he had been drinking does not appear to be a viable reason either. The crash was of course awful for all those close to Professor Bowden, and the verdict of accident would not have lessened the heartache that they would have felt at the time. About a year after Professor Bowden's death in 1982, another unusual case happened in April 1983. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Godley worked as the head of the work-study unit at the Royal College of Military Science in Shrivenham, close to Wiltshire. The Royal College of Military Science in the 1980s worked on testing new equipment for the military and on research and development. In April that year, Anthony Godley did not return to his role at Shrivenham, and he appeared to have just disappeared. When he disappeared, little was discovered about where he might have gone. It was known that after leaving the college, Anthony Godley travelled to Dover, which is around 168 miles and about 3.5 hours' drive from Shrivenham. He stayed at a hotel there after he left the college. However, the book Open Verdict explains that he left the hotel without paying his bill. It is reported that a yacht that Lieutenant Godley owned had reportedly disappeared from the harbour where it was usually located. His car was eventually found in Folkestone, about 8 miles from Dover. An alarming thing was that a pistol was found in the boot of his car. It is unclear why Anthony Godley had travelled to Dover, or what his purpose was in doing this. Why he left the hotel without paying his bill is also strange. One part of the story that is often cited in different reports is that Anthony's father died after he disappeared, leaving Anthony the money in his estate. The money had to be claimed by Anthony by 1987, however he did not ever reappear to claim the money. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Godley's information was circulated, and it has been hoped that something will be found out about his disappearance. Unfortunately, no information or leads have been found since 1983. This case is a little different to the other cases so far, as the Lieutenant Colonel went missing. However, he is often connected to these cases due to the fact that the Royal Military College of Science, where he worked, had strong ties with the defence industry, as did the other cases that have been discussed so far. The next death that is often linked with the other cases is the death of Rodger Hill. There is not much information about his death reported in a lot of sources. What we do know is that Rodger Hill was 49 in March 1985. He had been working as a radar designer and draftsman at the Marconi company. It is reported that he died after shooting himself with a shotgun in his own home. There is no more information about the circumstances of Rodger's death. However, his death has been ruled as a suicide. It is easy to see why his death has been included in these cases, as again Marconi was a large part of Rodger's life, and his job as a radar designer put him in a very important position in the defence industry. In November 1985, another case caused some alarm, as yet again a seemingly bizarre death was initially seen as a suicide. 29-year-old Jonathan Wash worked on the research and development at the British Telecom Technology Executive. It is reported that Jonathan was working on the System X digital telecommunications exchange, which was used in the modernisation of the public telephone network. However, some have suggested that this system had some other applications other than just for the telephone lines. The book Open Verdict explains that this system had been developed with GEC. Jonathan had been working for the company for a while, and in 1985 he was working in Abidjan, in the Ivory Coast, West Africa. Jonathan was working on securing a contract for the company there. In November 1985, he was on his second trip to Abidjan. On the 19th of November, during this second trip, a terrible incident occurred. Jonathan was found dead on a roof underneath his bedroom balcony. The scene appeared to show that Jonathan may have killed himself by jumping from the balcony. The problem with this theory was that Jonathan's family did not believe this was something that he would have done, and had spoken to him recently and did not think that he was contemplating suicide. Some people at British Telecoms explained that Jonathan was having some problems at work and that he may have been feeling the strain. This, however, had not been corroborated by anybody else. It was believed that Jonathan had purposefully jumped off his balcony. However, his family have continued to express that they didn't think this was a possibility, as Jonathan's letters implied he was content in what he was doing. Some work colleagues suggested, however, that he was fearing for his life, and there was the possibility that Jonathan had wanted to return to England as quickly as possible. While this was not corroborated by all colleagues, this suggestion was highlighted by British Telecom as the possible reason why Jonathan had decided to commit suicide. There were odd circumstances surrounding his death, particularly the fact that some of his belongings, including his shoes and a watch, were discovered in a room 2 floors above the location of his actual room. Why had Jonathan left some of his belongings there? Why had he been in that room? It is also reported that there were odd messages on the walls of the room. The messages reportedly contained things related to British Telecom wanting Jonathan dead, and the fact that he would not be able to reach England. This bizarre evidence was very strange and implied that Jonathan had possibly been in the room, and that something was going to happen to him. The authorities in Abidjan conducted a post-mortem, and this appeared to have some odd conclusions. The post-mortem came back stating that while Jonathan had injuries from the fall, he also had injuries consistent with a struggle. 4 post-mortems ended up being done, as when Jonathan was returned to England, 3 more were conducted. 2 stated that there were no signs of a struggle, and 1 organised by the family came back which agreed more with the Abidjan doctors. The inconsistencies between the post-mortems also caused confusion about what actually did happen to Jonathan. It is reported that the coroner ruled an open verdict in Jonathan's case. This open verdict has meant that the questions regarding what actually happened to him still hang in the air. Was Jonathan really fearful for his life? Had something happened while he was in Abidjan that may have caused his death? Why were there so many questions surrounding it? The fact that these questions about all of these cases remain ensure that the deaths continue to cause concern and suspicion today. The deaths of people working in the defence industry, however, did not stop in 1985. More bizarre and tragic deaths continued into 1988. In the next episode, we are going to look further into these deaths and the circumstances surrounding them. In the years 1987 to 88, a further 20 or more deaths occurred in just 2 years. These deaths have been connected due to the fact that again their jobs were in some way related to the field of the defence industry. Many of the deaths were ruled as suicide, accident, or were given an open verdict. The question is, were these deaths connected, or was this all a coincidence? I would like to point out that there is no official evidence that any of these cases are connected, and the industries involved have carried out an investigation which have ruled that they are not. These cases remain mysterious nonetheless, but also very sad, and I believe that their stories are very important to tell. I want to credit the book Open Verdict by Tony Collins as the primary source for this episode, and I would recommend it highly if you are interested in these cases, but also the political climate during the 1980s. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and thank you for being so patient over these past few weeks while I took a break. If you like the podcast and would like to support it, you can share us with family and friends you think might enjoy it. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts, which helps us to be seen by others. If you would like to contact us, you can on Facebook, Instagram, or on Twitter. You can also contact us at our email at theunseenpod@gmail.com if you would like to share your thoughts. I would like to feature some more less-known cases, so if you have any information about any cases you know about or any close to you that you would like featured, please let us know. Stay tuned for a promo from the fabulous Mens Rea podcast, a great UK true crime podcast which I personally love, and I'm sure you will too. Thanks again for listening, and until next week, I'm Caprice, and this has been Unseen.
Mens rea is the legal principle of intent that must be proved in a number of crimes, such as murder. It means literally, the guilty mind. The Mens Rea podcast explores the most notorious crimes from Ireland and the UK, and the court cases that followed. Every fortnight, a new case is discussed. So if you like hard-hitting, in-depth true crime podcasts, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and subscribe to the Mens Rea podcast today.